So, Steve, guess what we're talking about today?
A ship in space.
You are correct. We had this discussion like 20 minutes ago. Why am I even congratulating you? We are talking about a brick. An absolute fucking chunker of a spaceship. An embiggened skyscraper of a ship. Let me grab you a picture so that you can see. Because this thing, I'm gonna be honest, is probably the only ship in this universe that I look at and think, damn, that's a little ugly, because oh my god, is it fat. We today are talking about the SCIROCCO Class Assault Cruiser, a very long name and a very, very complicated ship. Both because it is just absolutely packed to the gills with everything you could possibly imagine, plus more, and it, in-universe, was designed to do basically everything you could imagine, plus some really, really dumb shit that we'll get into later. So, you ready to go, Steve? You excited?
I'm ready to go. I wouldn't say I'm excited, though.
Oh, is this like you're ready to leave, you're done, wash your hands and walk out the door?
Yeah, it's quitting time, actually. We're done here. Goodbye.
And he's gone, so I guess that means I'm doing the episode by myself today, folks, which means I also get all the money for it. Thanks, Steve. Goodbye.
Wait a second now.
Oh, and suddenly he comes back. I've said the magic words and summoned him. Generic greetings and welcome to Science and Sanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of sci-fi and all its often awesome splendor to you, the viewer. Today, like I said, we're covering the SCIROCCO Class Assault Cruiser, a frontline warship and the plug to fill the gaps in the Martian Navy's fleet composition. Because building nothing but Donagers would be nice, but they get bodied by a few stealth ships and painted rocks, so probably not the best idea to rely on them alone. But before we get into it, if you'd like to support the channel, leave a like, comment, drop a sub, or ring the bell button since every little bit helps and is appreciated. And if you want to go that extra mile and support us directly, check out our Patreon. Buy me a coffee or feed my starving co-host Steve. He needs it. He's all skin and bones locked down there in my basement. And with that, let's get into it, shall we? Normally, when we do these ship discussions, or whenever we talk about anything really, we start with like the lore and the history of the ship and the weapons and all of the greeblies and the weird ins and outs of the ship come later when we talk about the weapons and the dimensions and stuff. Instead, however, due entirely to one comment that I'm using as a scapegoat who is incredibly impatient and whining about taking so long to get to the quote-unquote good bits, we're gonna do the reverse. So today we're covering the stats and the funny stuff first to look at all the really dumb things stapled onto this spaceship, and then we're going to move on to the lore afterwards to figure out why the Martian government decided that they were going to build this abomination. Are you excited, Steve? Are you finally, like, getting into the episode's energy today, or are you still just going to sit there like a lump?
Well, considering I still haven't been introduced, I'm in fact not excited.
Oh my god, are you kidding me?
I will stand my ground on this point.
And along for the ride, ladies and gentlemen, is my co-host in the comedic relief, Steve. Say hello, Steve.
Hello. Okay, I'm ready to go now. Let's do this shit, man.
Oh my god. If you hadn't have said that, would you actually have just sat there silent for like 20 minutes while I continued on?
Oh, absolutely.
I hate you. I hate you so much. Holy shit. We're going to do the video this way because I also wanted an excuse to talk about the fact that the SCIROCCO has boarding claws on it, along with drop pods and stuff. So role-playing as a pirate is something that this ship could very realistically do, and I want to get to that quickly. So despite the fact I'm using that other guy crying in the comments as an excuse, the real reason is because I just really, really want to get into it. And let's start with the dimensions of this lad, because it is so incredibly thick. Add on as many C's as you want to that thick. It is probably the fattest ship in the entirety of the expanse. Proportionally, there are a lot of ships that are bigger than the SCIROCCO class. However, I don't think there's any of them that are quite so wide. Rotund is probably a good way to describe it.
Chonk.
Chonk is also a pretty good way. So coming in at 200 meters long from the thrust cone to the bow, the SCIROCCO is a huge ship for how stupidly effective it is. You see, most ships in the solar system of the same rough class of a cruiser are either significantly smaller or larger but significantly less effective. Now, the United Nations has a tendency to produce massive blocky disasters that on paper are really powerful, but in reality are falling apart behind the seams. Imagine the navies of pretty much any non-superpower nation and you get a good idea.
Or simply Russia's, I mean.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Their ships do have a tendency to either fall apart and or explode while sitting in dock, so...
Spontaneously catch on fire as well.
Spontaneously catch on fire during a storm in completely calm and totally fine weather amid a very, very gentle sea. So alongside that 200-meter length, it's also 72 meters wide. However, unlike most other ships, it doesn't actually have a height listed there because it's pretty much a cylinder. It's just built like a skyscraper. This thing is completely symmetrical in its absolute size. Most vessels larger than a frigate or a destroyer will tend to be fatter near the engines and slimmer near the top of the ship because, well, they're built like a mountain. It's really hard to move all that mass around, and keeping it as wide at the top as it is at the base is generally not a good idea. It can be a little bit of an issue when you're keeping the ship stable or when you're trying to reduce the stresses on the actual frame of the ship. The fact that this ship is built like a brick actually allows it to fit way more stuff into the space frame than other contemporary vessels, which is realistically the reason why the Martians decided to do this. It does mean, however, that it presents a huge and incredibly flat target to shoot at from pretty much any angle. Most larger ships, like I mentioned, are also built like spikes or spear tips because they can't dodge. They're so huge that trying to maneuver out of the way of incoming railgun slugs or torpedoes it's not going to happen. So they angle slightly or adjust their position just by a little bit, and in doing so cause the incoming munitions to hit the armored segments on the sides, dissipating energy or deflecting the shot or something out to where it won't do critical damage. The Scirocco cannot. Its entire face is flat. It's like a pug. Someone took a frying pan to the front of this thing and just flattened it.
That is one of the descriptions of all time, surely.
Oh my god, come up with a better joke, please. You've said the same thing like 5 times.
I shall not. I don't appreciate you coming at pugs like that, man.
They are ugly little devils. Don't even try. There's a better image of its flattened face, by the way. It's just like a...
that looks like a great wall to play wall ball on. That's all I got for you.
You know, unironically, looking at it from the front, it does kind of look like the side of an actual building. Like, it's got the little doors and stuff, and the torpedo hangers, the torpedo tubes with their protective covers look kind of like windows.
It's just a brick wall. I mean, that's all it is.
Oh god, yeah, that's right, because the Martians have just the endless texture of little black bricks all over all of their ships. The Aztecing is strong on these ones. I don't think that's the correct term, but you know what? Confidently incorrect. It's close enough.
We're going with it either way, so I mean...
Yeah, people will comment about how incorrect I am and tell me the singular hyper-specific term that I should obviously know because clearly I'm a nerd and an authority on this and how disappointed they are. And in reality, it's just us farming them for free YouTube algorithm fodder, and they'll never know.
Thoughts on you getting pinged approximately 4 minutes into recording by the viewers? What are our thoughts here?
I mean, I remembered to mute it this time. Hey, Discord is just sitting quietly in the corner there.
Look at you, finally doing something right.
How dare you assault me like this? I'm wounded. This is fatal. I'm calling the police. This is a murder. You've murdered me.
Call an ambulance, but not for me.
So, since this thing has a lot of mass to haul around the solar system, a Walmart mobility scooter just won't work, as we've established it's a very chunky boy. So instead, the Martian Navy bolted 4 massive RT-8F engines onto the base of it. And I don't think you really appreciate how big these engines actually are, so let me give you a little chart of all the ships in the expanse. That little image there that shows the scale. Now, do you know which one of those ships is the hero ship, the one that all of our main characters spend tons of time on?
Does that say Epstein's yacht?
Yes.
Outstanding.
Look, it's fine. It has no relation to real life. It's a totally different thing. It's fine. Don't worry about
it. Surely nothing can go wrong with this.
Okay, even in universe, everything went wrong, but not for the reasons you're expecting. It's fine. More of the reasons that everybody on it died. It's okay.
I see.
Everyone on it is dead. It's fine.
Just like Jeff, man. I mean, the one above Epstein's yacht.
That's the Donager. That thing is fucking huge.
Yeah.
That's not the hero ship. Okay, it's the one directly above that. You know what? To be fair, I apologize. I keep forgetting that you lack these basic human abilities. That's my bad for putting you on the spot once more.
I mean, you're putting like 3 pixel images up here again. I mean, I can't read these, man.
Oh my god. Yeah, and somehow you could read the smallest text for the smallest ship at the very bottom of the page? Okay, sure.
I have superpowers when it comes to detecting Epstein, I guess.
Shut up. You see all that cluster of smaller ships in between the two really big ones? A single one of the engines on the SCIROCCO class is bigger than the entirety of the hero ship, and pretty much about the same size as the Amun-Ra, which are those really fancy, really powerful stealth ships that kill the Donager in like the second episode of the show. These engines allow the SCIROCCO to accelerate ridiculously hard. Like, these engines proportionally are absolutely colossal. They're about on par with the Donager, and that thing has the actual most powerful engines ever built. Like I mentioned, this allows the SCIROCCO, despite its size, to maintain multiple Gs of acceleration, with short bursts of much higher thrust if needed for maneuvers or evasion, the kind of thrust that would probably kill someone if they were subjected to it for more than a few minutes. And its average cruising speed is easily more than enough to hold 1G at all times, which, considering its size, is really impressive, and considering the Martians can't really handle 1G, and they mostly do that for the Martian Marines on board to pretend that they're as good as Earthers, it's still pretty damn impressive. But the size and maneuverability aren't what really makes this thing fun or special. It's important for the ship to avoid eating shit constantly whenever it gets into a fight, because, like we mentioned, massive flattened forehead is a great target for incoming railgun slugs, and the majesty of the sun when people start throwing nukes around. No, what makes this thing special is the frankly stupid amount of stuff they've managed to staple onto it in regards to everything weaponry, really. It can do pretty much everything. So what do you want to start with, Steve? Guns, missiles, the really meme-worthy stuff that's just on there for no reason?
No, I want to start with the practical stuff that's not meme-worthy in the slightest. We're still going to take a while to get to that stuff for that guy, just for him.
Okay, fair enough. Let's start with the gun then. The singular, very big gun that it has. Because, like the Expanse loves to repeat over and over again when it comes to weapons technology, railguns are really powerful, generally really big, and require an absolute shitload of energy to operate. So the fact that the Rocinante has one just bolted on there at like the third season or whatever, there is no universe where that little ship should be able to maintain a railgun on it. But the SCIROCCO, being so big, can. However, it's a very, how do I put this, strange location that they've stapled this thing on. Let me see if I can find you a good image that shows it. The SCIROCCO is actually asymmetrical, which is quite rare for hard science fiction ships, because generally being symmetrical takes a lot of stress off of the engines or the balancing or making sure that the mass is lined up properly to avoid the ship slowly turning off away from whatever bearing it's set. So as you can see there, that big extension that comes off the side, that is the railgun turret.
Is that like an actual turret above that the railgun's in, or is it the...
Nope, yep, it's a little turret on top of that. They needed the base, that big thing coming off the side of the ship, the tumor. They put that on there in order to actually give the railgun firing clearance to improve its angle of fire, but also they need a lot of power capacitors to charge it. The gun, however, the V14 Stiletto Light Railgun, is one of the most unique and practical features of the ship, because as was established very early on, small ships can't carry these railguns. So if the SCIROCCO gets into knife fighting range, it can just whip out the big iron and start poking holes in the enemy ship long before the enemy gets within range to start firing their own PDCs back.
Actual good design? The hell?
These are Martian ships. They tend to be well designed because the person who created it was like, Martians, quality over quantity, let's go. Do you want to know what a stiletto actually is and why it's a really cool name for this railgun?
It's the heel on shoes, on like heels.
No.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I'm right, but maybe just not in this context.
You're right, but not in the context. You're technically correct.
That's kind of correct.
It also shares a name with the heel of a shoe, but they're both named after the same thing, which is the word for stylus in like Latin or something. Now, the stiletto, the weapon, is essentially a dagger, but it's shaped like a needle, triangular or square or circular. You're meant to stab people with it. You would force it through the weak points in an opponent's armor, or use it to parry an enemy's strike and then stab them between the ribs. So you would use this thing to kill people by stabbing them in the heart, or putting it through a knight's visor and stabbing him through the skull with it. And it was such an effective weapon that they would often be used to kill knights or to assassinate people, because you just slip up behind them and shank them in the back of the heart with this thing and then run away real quick. Having this little light railgun as a surprise weapon, this thing you can use to instantly kill an opponent if they get close enough, it's a pretty good name for a light railgun. I like it. I think it's very topical.
I absolutely hate it.
Why?
Just to be controversial. No real reason.
Are you serious?
Just to contradict you.
That's how we're doing
that's how
this?
this works, yeah.
That's what we're going
I
with?
thought you would have figured that out by now, but...
Back to what we were talking about, the railguns, whatever. To United Nations ships, this is pretty special. Now, most UNN ships do have a lot of railguns. Any contemporary ships of roughly the SCIROCCO's size also tend to carry more. I think the UNN equivalent has 2 of them, but the difference is this is an actually functional gun. It actually works. You can fire it while the ship is moving, you can turn it and aim it while the ship is moving. If you're in the middle of combat and you're doing hard maneuvers, or you're really putting the ship through its paces with the missile fire and stuff, there's still enough energy to run the railguns. It's an actually workable weapon that can be used at all times. So, we've talked about the gun that this thing has. Let's talk about the missiles. Do you remember how missiles and torpedoes or whatever in the Expanse work, Steve? Or do you need a refresher on that?
Give me a slight refresher.
Okay, so generally, they're their own little contained spacecraft. They have a giant engine on the back, and they have a bunch of thrusters on the sides to allow them to maneuver and dodge incoming point defense fire as they're tracking towards a target. However, there's 2 main kinds of them. Number 1, anti-ship missiles, which are smaller, significantly more maneuverable. They're designed to get through the defenses of an enemy ship and damage or disable them. Then you have the really big ones, which are, well, most of the time they're nuclear, so, you just drop the sun on someone's forehead, and if they can't catch it, well, too bad for them. The majority of ships, however, only carry light missiles, because the big ones, they're too big. Like the Rocinante, for example, only carries light missiles, and I think it only carries like a dozen of them or something, because the actual big missiles are, again, like the majority of the ship's size. You could fit like one right down the center of the ship, and that would be the sum total that the Roci could carry. This thing, though, being absolutely enormous, has a ton of them. Would you like to take a wild stab in the dark at how many it has?
We're gonna go 24.
I did it to you again, Steve. It's absolutely not fair to throw that question at you because you have no reference. I know you've seen the series. I know we've done multiple Expanse videos, but you remember nothing. You're like a goldfish. Did you just pick a number? Did you just randomly guess?
Yes. I'm changing my answer. 832.
You were significantly closer the first time. You were slightly more than twice as much the first time. You should have gone lower. 10. It's got 10.
Close enough.
Now, the average person might look at that and be like, wow, that's nothing, only 10 silos, but often they forget that this is the future, and unlike in the real world where VLS silos or missile bays only have the number of missiles that there are bays before you gotta reload the whole bloody thing, in the Expanse, these are rapid-fire auto-reloading. This is actually a much better image. Let me slap this in here for you to see. That bright part at the front of the ship you see there, where you can see those 5 door-looking things, those are the anti-capital, anti-planet, anti-space station missile launchers. A single one of those, tipped with a nuclear warhead, is probably an instant kill on the vast majority of targets it's going to be shooting at. They auto-load from the bottom and the rear, I believe. So those little doors swing open, which is really funny because most of the ships in the Expanse don't really have those doors. Once the torpedo launchers are exposed, it's just a hole. It's just a tube leading to the magazine. This thing actually has protective doors on the front of it. So not only can it fire full volleys of 5 of these city-obliterating missiles, but it can also reload them in seconds. So as an assault ship, this thing can basically dump dozens of missiles into the void in minutes. And although you can't see it in that image, above those are 5 more smaller launchers. So they're about half the size, and they're hidden under that little lip in the top of the ship there.
These are the ones we called on Windows earlier, right?
Yes, they look a little bit like windows. They're like door things on the front of the ship.
Gotcha.
Anyways, so these ones, the ones on top, are the smaller anti-ship missiles. And because they are all located in the same place, unlike a lot of other ships which fire torpedoes from different places, like the left and right of the ship or the front and back in the case of the Doniger, the Scirocco can dump all of its torpedoes at the same time, which allows it to stack up its fire a lot more effectively in volleys. A really common strategy for the Scirocco, since again it's an assault ship, it's in the actual name, assault cruiser, what it'll do is it'll fire a whole bunch of those smaller anti-ship missiles to try to disable or damage an enemy. Even if the torpedoes don't directly impact a ship, if they explode nearby, it's very common for the shrapnel and debris that it causes to knock out some of the point defense guns. And then following up immediately behind that is the really big one-hit KO missiles that come out a little bit later. So it's essentially that 1-2 punch that this thing has. The first volley poses a huge threat to enemy ships, not potentially fatal depending on how big they are, but a huge threat, and so they have to take them down. And that gives time for the majesty of the sun to be crammed down their throat with the second wave incoming before the point defense grid has a chance to adjust and fire back.
I can't believe we're experiencing actual competent strategy. This is such an amazing universe compared to Battletech.
Why are you like this? You just pissed off like 80% of our audience. You realize that, right?
I live to be controversial.
No, you live to cause me problems and take my money.
Same thing.
So the missile armament of this ship is incredibly impressive. Not only does it have these fast-loading missile banks that deliver a really good 1-2 punch and allow it to hit way above its raw size, like this thing will pose an issue to the Truman-class dreadnoughts, which are ostensibly some of the most powerful ships that Earth has, but they also carry a ton of different warheads. Nuclear, of course, standard high explosive, but because the Martians are really advanced, they also have a couple different kinds of fancy explosives. They've got some plasma ion ones where if you smack the shit out of an enemy ship with it, it doesn't just explode. It overloads all of the electronics and the power plant of the ship and disables it, essentially making it dead in the water as it drifts away, no longer a threat. They also, if you decide that the Belters really deserve to not be alive today, but you want their ship for some reason, probably for the information being more valuable than their lives, it carries anti-personnel fletchet rounds. Would you like to take a wild guess what these missiles do?
Are they biological warfare?
I said fletchet. Flechet? Do you want me to pronounce it like that? Flechet?
I don't know. Maybe like speak a real language. I don't know.
How do you...
Look, I'm not French, okay?
Fine.
Leave me alone.
Fine. Let me put it in American. It's got them buckshot. There. Is that easier? Do you understand that?
There we go. I understand now. Yeah, I gotcha. I gotcha.
Steve, please. Do you actually understand, or are we doing this reading comprehension test again?
No.
Do you need a picture?
I actually got you now.
Okay.
I actually got you now.
So what happens is, instead of just blowing the ship up like most of the other warheads, or disabling the ship in the case of those fancy energy ones, what these ones will do is they'll actually explode a little distance away from the enemy ship rather than on contact, and fire a massive spread of shrapnel and internal projectiles towards it. Now, in most cases, these are not powerful enough to actually rip through important systems like the reactor shielding or any of the thruster components, the internal parts at least, the ones that can explode. But what it will do is absolutely shitwreck all the people inside and pretty much cripple any chance they have of fighting back by ripping all the external greebly bits like the PDCs and the communication equipment to shreds. So if you fire this at an enemy ship, you are rapidly going to polymorph all of the people inside into meaty Swiss cheese.
Sounds delicious.
It's like something you'd get at McDonald's. Let's go.
Oh my goodness. No way he's coming at Mickey D's like that, man.
Dude, McDonald's food ranges from absolutely fantastic crack cocaine levels of addiction to pretty much dog shit. And I don't know what causes it. Sometimes you get food from McDonald's, amazing. Sometimes you get it from Mickey D's, absolutely shit.
I see what the issue is here. One of them's McDonald's, one of them's Mickey D's. Pronounce things the same way, I guess. I don't know.
No, I'm not gonna rise to your bait. I'm gonna be a better man. No. No, I'm gonna be the better man. I'm gonna be the bigger man, Steve. No, I will not do it. I will not let you drag me down for whatever bullshit you had planned. Instead, we are going to move on, despite the fact that the Corvette class, the Rocinante, the hero ship, is about the size of one of its engines. The Scirocco only has about double the point defense guns as the Rocinante does. The Rossi has 6 of them. Very high performing, very good. For a ship of its size, makes the Rossi basically untouchable by low quality or primitive munitions. You basically can't kill the thing. The Scirocco, the very first ship that was made, only had 12 point defense guns. And the thing is as well, they're not even concentrated particularly well. You see, one way that the Expanse does defense is that the guns are essentially organized in such a way where they have overlapping fields of fire and they can almost shepherd missiles into kill zones by working together. Very effective.
I agree, very effective.
And what they'll do, for example, the Rocinante can fire like all of its guns directly forward if it's chasing someone, and can fire the majority of its guns backwards to the sides or in any other direction, right? It's extremely effective at protecting itself. The Scirocco cannot. And it's one of those weird tidbits where it goes very out of its way to state very specifically that the point defense guns are spread out very symmetrically around the ship. It's got 2 on the top, 2 on each of those triangular sides, 1 on each engine, 2 on the front, pointlessly spread out all over the place. At any given time, the Scirocco would be lucky if it can bring half of its PDCs to bear on any incoming threat. It would be lucky if it could get half. And the very first thing they did after building the first one was go, oh, shit, that's really, really bad. And so they immediately stapled 2 more point defense guns on the flat pug face front of that thing in order to try to protect it a little bit more.
A whole 2 more, man. Surely that will have a significant impact.
A whole 2 more. You know, it's really funny because it doesn't fit the scaling at all. And then you look at the Donager, and it's the biggest ship. It's got like 52 or 54 of those things. Just a massive amount, right? And it's double the size of the Scirocco. So why does the Scirocco have like half as many guns as it should? It should have like 24, 25 guns, minimum. But it's just so underarmed. And on the one hand, the lore tells us that they're simply so effective that they compensate. But I don't believe that.
I don't trust anything they tell me anymore, so...
So the Scirocco's only real weakness is that this thing is very, very vulnerable to incoming torpedo fire. If it's alone, I imagine, in my own headcanon, that it would probably be overwhelmed by a roughly peer foe. And this kind of feeds into the fact that it's an assault ship. It's not really designed to take hits or to be receiving focus fire. That's the job of the much bigger ships like the Donager, who's supposed to be just a brick shithouse that can fight the entire solar system and win, or the much smaller ships like the Corvette and stuff. The smaller ships and the escorts and stuff are really what I think is supposed to be responsible for keeping the Scirocco alive, because its job, as we move into the last little bits of greeblies here and there and the nice quality of life improvements and stuff it has, is to be a force amplifier and a decisive strike tool against the enemy. So, remember how I talked about that this was the all-in-one ship. Realistically, this is the Swiss Army spaceship, right? It can do a little bit of everything. And do you notice the really big bright section on the bottom of it? Once again, going back to that first image, those what almost looks like little fighter bays or hangar bays or something it's got stapled onto the bottom there.
Are you telling me those aren't hangar bays?
They are hangar bays. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're getting
well,
into.
You said it looked like it, which made me think that it wasn't actually one of them. So, you know, you're just trying to run a little misdirection on me again.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it wouldn't be that hard considering you get confused by McDonald's or Mickey D's, you know, it's... The Scirocco also carries a whole bunch of dropships, little chariot dropships, that's what they're called. Each of those little cutouts that you see is meant to house one of these chariot dropships. Now, it can carry an entire company of Marines down on whatever unhappy populace and most likely Belter-occupied area that it wants to. Whether it be a station, or a moon, or another spaceship, these things are capable of landing, locking on, and breaching, in many cases, entryways into an enemy ship. So if this thing latches onto the side of your spaceship, it's probably just going to cut a hole straight through it, and, well, Martian Marines have vac-sealed suits, so if you are not in a spacesuit, if you are, in fact, in a pressurized ship, you are about to have a very, very bad day when the Martians come a-knocking. As well, in order to maintain these dropships, because generally boarding actions are extremely taxing, very difficult, and often require heavy amounts of maintenance for any of the clunking, clanking, and return fire that they tend to experience, the SCIROCCO also has a number of machine shops and fabrication bays in there that allow it to both break down, work on, and recreate a number of small parts. So if like a little gasket or like ball bearings or something breaks, they can just mill new ones on board with some of the raw materials that they carry and just repair that stuff no problem. Or if something isn't really that badly banged up and just kind of bent out of shape, they can rebend it back into shape, slot it back on, and presumably violate all safety standards that would be out there on reusing damaged parts and just good as new, no problem, slap some duct tape on there and you're good to go.
OSHA does not exist.
OSHA regulations don't apply if the inspector can never get to you. Simply keep on the move or put a few holes in him when he shows up and your problems are solved.
Real.
In general, boarding an enemy ship is a terrible idea. With the fact that they are constantly moving, and they have the ability to rapidly thrust in different directions, it would be extremely likely that any ship they tried to board would be, well, almost impossible. Even if it was partially disabled, it would be extremely dangerous to try to land those dropships on an enemy vessel that is just spinning uncontrollably through space. So, how do you think that the SCIROCCO solves the problem of getting the Marines onto an enemy vessel? How does it manage to do this?
It utilizes the non-existent magic in the Expanse universe and simply docks itself with the other ship.
Correct! It's got some magic garbage in there that's going to be really fun to talk about because we're getting into it. So, along the sides of the ship, however, along the side of the ship, the one that doesn't have the railgun on it, it's got a whole bunch of little pods. You see those little circular things? Those are breaching pods. On the actual ship, they're hexagonal, but whatever. Close enough. Now, do you want to know how they work, Steve? Would you like to take a stab in the dark?
Do they simply punch through the ship?
Congratulations, you get it right again. Yes, they fire a little missile at the ship and the payload is people. Very angry people with guns coming to kick your skull in. And once the SCIROCCO gets up close and personal with an enemy vessel, it fires a breaching pod that rips through the outer hull, creating a vacuum seal as it does so, pretty much like welding itself to the ship. And then all the Marines inside get an easy way to just bust in and start killing people. This is how a lot of the Martians actually board Belter ships, because they mention in the Expanse that a lot of Belters needed to be quote-unquote subdued in quote-unquote anti-piracy operations, which basically just means kill all the Belters you don't like and that are in your space. And this is one of the ways that they did it. If someone is resisting or they believe it's a smuggler, they'll disable the ship or force them to stay still enough, and then just yeet one of these manned missiles directly at them. Would you like to guess how the ship manages to keep an enemy close enough and lined up enough that it can use these breaching pods if they are actively fighting back or trying to get away?
It simply makes them stop actively fighting back.
Yes, would you like to guess how it does that?
Railgun to the face.
No, you're thinking too advanced. You gotta go like 600 years into the past. Come on.
Oh, we're gonna throw the lines back and forth and we're gonna grapple across.
Yes! This ship has giant fucking harpoon launchers on the side that fire boarding claws. It can grapple and lasso enemy ships. Can literally just fucking yeet these stupid magnetic clamps and these physical claws out, grab an enemy ship, and reel that sucker in. Good old-fashioned piracy on the high seas, basically. It's so hilariously stupid.
I think this is one of the best features of the show so far, or the franchise.
I don't think they ever show up in the show, but it's canon lore. It's so stupid. Like, just Just think about that, okay? But instead of it being like sailing ships, the analogy is two motorboats going at like 200 miles an hour in opposite directions, basically, and you try to throw out a claw to grab that thing and grapple to it. It's the greatest, stupidest thing ever. It shouldn't work. It shouldn't be possible.
Just because it shouldn't be doesn't mean it isn't.
Even really, really soft sci-fi, the most space magic fantasy type of sci-fi, generally avoids using grappling hooks and boarding harpoons in order to actually, like, get in close combat with enemy ships. So the fact that it shows up in the Expanse of all places, which is like the hard sci-fi IP of the recent decade, is just absolutely ridiculous. And that pretty much sums up the majority of the Scirocco's stats, components, what the ship actually has. And now we're going to move on to the more boring part and talk a little bit about the lore, like why it was built and stuff. Do you want to take a wild stab in the dark, considering we've done some other Expanse stuff?
It was built to demonstrate Martian superiority.
Well, I mean, yes and no. The Martians believe themselves to be superior because they are... It was built because they're pathologically terrified of Earth. We've been over this, right? During the Martian Society video. The Scirocco was built during the Martian Rearmament and Modernization program. This was essentially completely overhauling their fleet. The same time that the Donager and the Corvette were built, all of those more modern, super powerful, top-of-the-line warships, the Scirocco was similarly part of that weapons program. However, it was designed to fill a very different niche. You see, Mars knew that it could never beat Earth in raw numbers. Even after this rearmament program was coming to its close and they were meeting the initial production orders and stuff, and Mars had to debate on further expanding the program, they were still outnumbered like 3-1 by Earth, and in some cases 4 or 5-1 in areas where they didn't have a whole lot of assets. The Donagers were supposed to be essentially an equalizer, being able to fight 3 or 4-1 odds, and a lot of the smaller ships, like the Corvette and stuff, were generally used to help those larger ships out. They would show up, they'd have a few missiles, they'd have a lot of PDCs, they'd be really good at fighting other Earth ships. In one-on-one fights, they'd pretty much always win, but the problem that they were running into is they had extremes of their fleet. They had a lot of really, really big ships that were kind of vulnerable to hordes of smaller enemies and were designed to fight dreadnoughts and big cruisers and stuff. And they had an absolute horde of smaller vessels, which were really good at fighting other small vessels, but weren't particularly good at punching up because they didn't really have heavy weapons. Oh, sure, they had torpedoes and stuff, but against a Truman dreadnought with his railguns and its much, much larger array of torpedoes, they wouldn't stand a chance. So they needed something that would fill that gap. That's why I called it the Martian solution, the plug to fill up the gaps in their navy, because in many ways that's what it was. They designed a ship that had a heavy anti-capital ship weaponry, as well as heavy anti-small ship weaponry. Picket ship weaponry, support ship, escort. Let's go with escort. Heavy anti-escort weaponry.
Pigeon laser weaponry.
Pigeon laser from BattleTech. Small little thing. And then they designed it to work in conjunction with a lot of those smaller ships. So now suddenly they didn't have to commit a Donager for any really small engagements. Let's say, there's a conflict over a moon that maybe only has a small garrison of a couple ships. Well, you're not going to put one of these new top-of-the-line Donager battleships all the way out there. Those are the kind of ships that are leading entire battle fleets by themselves of dozens or hundreds of ships. You're just going to have a few small corvettes, maybe some frigates out there docked up to a station, and if they need to engage a larger force, a Scirocco is pretty much the perfect thing to send with them, because its 1-2 punch of those wonderfully effective torpedoes means that it can effectively engage other cruisers and capital ships. Its relatively lacking defenses are easily made up for by all of the smaller escort ships around it, and it can amplify their own ability using its computer and tracking systems. So the Scirocco essentially served as the gap or the stand-in between the really big heavy-hitting line ships and the small smaller garrison, escort, or patrol vessels that Mars had an absolute ton of, but wouldn't necessarily be effective in an outright fight without some kind of support. However, it also fit in with their logistics. Now, the Martian Marine Corps is relatively small. It's nowhere near as big as Earth, and if it came down to a fight, with infantry and army and stuff, Mars would get its absolute shit kicked in. This also alleviated more problems on the logistics side of things. You see, Mars could invest in dedicated troop transports similar to what Earth has. Now, a lot of Earth ships pull double duty and they can carry Marines and stuff, but Earth also has dedicated troop transports for moving large numbers of personnel around. Mars could engage with something like that, or they could save money and production space in their docks, of which they had a very limited number of space docks to build ships, by adding on to the SCIROCCO a little bit of extra infrastructure to carry these troops around. If it was going into a space battle, it just wouldn't carry this stuff. It would save some of that mass, load on maybe a little bit more ammo, change some stuff up in the cargo bays so that it could bring more medical supplies or more oxygen or something, so if it takes damage or loses some of its necessary survival supplies or filters or whatever, or garbage, who cares, then it can replace them.
I think oxygen's the least important resource that they could carry extra, but I mean, that's not needed for anything important, so...
The crew?
Yeah, not important, like I said.
These are Martians, not belters. You can throw 1,000 belters out the airlock and not care. There's always going to be countless more of them. Plus, they don't really matter. But the Martians, there's not very many of them. There's not very many of them at all. Every single one of them that dies hurts. You really don't want to be losing them. And you really don't want to be losing ships in general either. They're not machines, even if they love to pretend that they are.
Agree to disagree.
Do you like any faction in the Expanse? You started out hating belters, and now you're hating on the Martians. Do you like any of the factions?
I still hate the belters the most, but I just hate most things in general.
Getting back on track, we only have a few minutes left before we're finally done. The SCIROCCO essentially served as the everything ship for the Martian Navy, and the reason it looks pretty damn fat and is so weird with all of the stuff bolted onto it is because it was essentially a successful example of the design by committee disaster that happens all the time in military procurement, where 100 different competing interests during the design phase all wanted to staple on their own bits and bobs here and there, but when it actually came out the other end, turns out it wasn't a disaster, and it actually worked pretty well, allowing the Martians to field a relatively inexpensive ship. For their economy, it was very expensive, but for the size of the ship and how much stuff it could do, it was pretty good value for it. And it also allowed them to cut down on costs and save on time by having one ship that could do a whole lot of things okay and one or two things really well, rather than a whole bunch of different ship designs that could do individual things really well that they needed to meet their needs. And that pretty much sums up why the SCIROCCO exists. It is a fat, pretty ugly, kind of dumb looking ship with some ridiculously over-the-top gimmicks and memes, and a few major strengths with only a couple minor weaknesses. Well, I say minor, but having mediocre defense is probably not a minor weakness. And with that, we're pretty much done. Huge thanks to all of the patrons and the supporters of the channel. The video's pretty much over, so might as well thank all the people that bankroll us in the background. Thank you very much, it's greatly appreciated and goes a long way. And to all the members of the $5 tier, a special thanks. David G, Augie, 11 Bravo Crunchy, Terry Higgins, Pedro Munaz, David G, The Other One, Silencer, Vox Apollyon, Phoenix, BT Legend, Electroboy 11, Logan Maynard, Mickey, David Armand, Creedome, Robin Stappet, Fenrir Striker, Tachi Tukane, He's Deb, Pixie, Vertus, Fabric 445, Anchovy Bob, Mini Crustacean, Charles the Snep, Paulie, Eric Jones, Joseph Holiday, Zombie the Zerker, David B, and Sweet B, with Rastro, Le Butcher, and the new guy, Stabby Taco. You ran all the way. Yes. You ran all the way to the Patreon just to look that up, so you could throw it in there at the end.
Problem?
You know what? Fine then. You get to do the last 2 lines of outro. Have fun.
We hope you all have enjoyed. Please go watch the other content. Tune in next week. Goodbye.